Live from the Orion Cygnus arm of the Milky Way galaxy, this is Scientifically Speaking, a weekly half-hour program devoted to elegant curiosities, and I am one of your hosts, Sarah Chang, and joining me, as always, is Bernie Rhyme, DJ Star Watcher. How are you, Bernie?
Yes, hi Sarah, very good, thank you.
Bernie is our professor of the astronomy lab here at USM and our local protector of the night skies. You can reach out to us at WMPG Scientifically Speaking at gmail.com or on Twitter at WMPG SciSpeak. And just a note, I wanted to start doing this thing called Sunday Funnies, where I post funny things on Twitter every Sunday. So check that out, and maybe it'll give you a laugh. All right, Bernie, can you let our listeners know what is up in the night sky for this coming week?
Okay, good, I'll do that. Unfortunately, it won't be quite as exciting as last week. So this will be Friday, January 8th. So the moon will be a waning crescent moon. That means it's not going to come up till 2 in the morning. So it'll be nice and dark. You can watch the Orion come up the other day by 5:30. Pretty much the whole winter hexagon is up. The planets are still visible. They're not as close, obviously. They're getting much further apart. You can see them for a few more weeks. That would be Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter is still 10 times brighter than Saturn, but now they've traded places. So it's kind of interesting. Now Jupiter's to the left. The whole time we were watching, up till the solstice, Jupiter was on the right. Now it passed Saturn. So they're there. So as if to do like a last minute exit, the planet Mercury is going to join them in a few days. So try to catch Mercury for about a week. So you have 3 planets in the evening sky right after sunset in the west. You might need a pair of binoculars to see Mercury because it's not going to be quite as bright as Jupiter. So look for that. And if you like to get up early, Venus probably gets up around 4:30 or 5 in the morning. You can see that. And basically, that's about it. So basically, you can see all the planets. Mars is still up. Mars is getting a little further away. All the planets are getting a little fainter. So, but they're there, and it still has a bit of an orange color. And through a little telescope, you can still see some features for maybe a couple more weeks. So that's basically it.
Awesome. Thanks, Bernie.
Yeah, thanks.
And if you couldn't take notes fast enough, you can also check out the monthly What's Up column in the Portland Press Herald. So today's topic is all about supply chains. And specifically, we'll get to a point where we talk about supply chains during a pandemic, because that is a very common thing that has happened in our lifetime. But ultimately, I think a pretty simple definition is that supply chains are kind of the heart of a company's operations. But we have a special guest today who knows much more about supply chains than either myself or Bernie, and that is Keith Launchbury. How are you?
I'm doing great. Okay. Maybe I should introduce myself to your listeners.
Yeah, go for it.
My name is Keith Launchbury. You could probably tell from my accent that I'm not originally from New England. I'm from the old England, and I've lived over here for many, many years, and I'm a professional in supply chain management. I was the president of APICS, which is the American Production and Inventory Control Society, which has now become the Association for Supply Chain Management. I was their president in 1991, and I'm an instructor for APICS. I've instructed many, many programs, certification programs in supply chain management. And I'm also a master instructor with the Demand Driven Institute, which is a new take on supply chain. Obviously, supply chains don't exist in a vacuum. There has to be demand, and the demand has to be met through supply chain. And one of the issues that we're facing today is that our supply chains are breaking down for many, many reasons. One is extremely high demand for some products, and then a lack of supplies of raw materials, even things like dry ice, which you need to pack the vaccines that people need for COVID-19. They have to be shipped in extremely cold conditions, and that requires dry ice, and there's a worldwide shortage of dry ice. And then you need what they call cold chain to be able to distribute the product, and we don't have enough super low refrigerated transport. So these are the challenges that we're facing today in trying to get the vaccines delivered to the people who need them. So supply chain management has become center stage, really, for many, many people, where they never really realized what it was before but now they realize what happens when it doesn't work. When you go to Walmart and you cannot find the things you normally buy on the shelf because they're not there, it's because the supply chain has broken down.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I think a really simple way or a simple metaphor would be our roads just suddenly like not working. Like
Right.
all of the roads have been destroyed and now we have to try and drive across it and we can't get from point A to point B or have
Exactly.
things come to
Exactly.
us.
Yeah,
Perfect.
and in particular, supply chain management is about getting product from A to B. But the hardest thing is the last mile, is to get it to the person. Imagine trying to deliver a vaccine to somebody in a nursing home who cannot leave the nursing home. And so you have to bring the vaccine to them. But the problem is it's got to be super refrigerated. And, somebody driving their car doesn't have that capability. So we've got to find ways of bringing people to the vaccine or bringing the vaccine to the people. It's the same issue.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So Keith, you have this really nice quote that people are very good at the business of science, but people are not very good at the science of business.
Yes, this is
Could you
true.
talk a little bit about that? What that means?
Yeah.
Well, yes, I will. Because the thing is that if you work for a company that is scientific, and I'm talking about companies that are like pharmaceuticals, biotech, they're very much into the research and development, developing new molecules, developing new formulas, finding the latest thing. But if you cannot bring that product to market, it is useless to develop something in the lab and not be able to deliver it to people. That's the problem. The problem is you cannot just do one thing well. You have to do the whole thing well. And it's no good being an excellent scientist, a biologist, a chemist, if you don't have people who are equally competent in the profession of delivering product to customers. And the key word today is flow. You have
Mm,
to flow your product to the customer at the rate at which the customer is consuming it. And a lot of businesses don't understand the concept of flow. They've never understood the concept of flow. And
Mhm.
all they understand is the concept of cost. And
mm,
we're not living in a cost driven world anymore. We're living in a flow driven world. And the flow driven world requires that you understand how the demand is recognized, how it is changing, and how you need to adapt to that. So that's what's got to happen. We've got to change.
yeah, yeah. So, for this, for supply chains now, there's all these things like new technology that has come about now. In many ways, supply chains have now shifted kind of very drastically. Like one of the things that I think about, not tied to the pandemic, fast fashion was one of those topics in supply chains that I'm semi familiar with when we're talking about like companies like H&M or Forever 21, Zara, who they will take fashion from the runways and they have some kind of model to shrink like a 6 to 9 month supply chain timeline, if you will, down to like a couple of weeks because they have really quick turnovers and really fast. Is that something similar to kind of what we're talking about?
Well, it's part of it, and certainly some of the companies, like the ones you've mentioned, and Louis Vuitton, and the other high-end market, they have realized that it's about getting the product quickly to market. And Zara is a great example of everything that they sell is out of stock in 2 weeks because they don't want a lot of inventory.
Mm-hmm.
They want to get it flowing through. They understand the concept of flow, flowing it through to the customer rather than keeping it in a warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is a lot of companies are still stocking inventory in the warehouse. And the problem there is you've got too much of the stuff you don't need, and
Mm-hmm.
you never have enough of the stuff that you do need. And so your inventory is always wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, it is not an asset. I mean, there are accounting people who will argue with me and they will tell me, oh, yes, inventory is an asset. It's on the books of the company. It's a book value thing. But don't tell me that if your product has expired on the shelf because nobody wanted to buy it. That is no longer an asset. That has now become a liability.
Yeah.
And so at what point does your warehouse become full of junk? You know, And it's simple because I say that the amount of junk you have expands to fill the space you have available. That the more warehouse space you have, the more people want to fill it with stuff. And they'll fill it with stuff. And the stuff that sticks on the shelf is the stuff that doesn't sell. And meanwhile, there are other products that people need desperately that we can't get enough of because we don't have enough inventory on those items.
So how do you know what people want? I
Oh,
mean, I think okay, so in if we talk about, March, when COVID really came to the US, there was like the toilet paper thing. I mean, I feel like when hurricanes come in Florida, you kind of know it's the water, it's the milk, it's the bread, it's like those key staples. But of all things, why was that, the one thing that was in demand?
well, there are many, many examples. Hand sanitizer, N95 masks, personal protective equipment
Mhm.
for people in hospitals. All that stuff was in short supply because nobody anticipated this. Nobody thought that this was real, or they didn't invest enough in
Mhm.
a protection system because the risk was so low. We managed H1N1, we managed swine flu, we managed Ebola without having a global pandemic. So people are not prepared for a pandemic, and businesses had no business plan. If you asked people last November what they were forecasting for next year, 2020, if we asked them in November 2019, they'd say we're going to grow our business by 5%. The airlines said that. The cruise industry said they were going to increase their business by 20%, and they didn't. We know. My wife and I were stuck on a cruise ship on March the 11th
Oh,
when the
wow.
WHO declared a global pandemic, and every single port we wanted to go to said no, you cannot dock. I mean, we had a hard time getting off the ship,
Yeah.
getting permission to get off the ship, and then finding a flight home from South Africa. I mean, this was a pain, but we
Wow.
did it. We just bought a ticket on another airline to get out and come back home. But businesses have to adapt to a situation that they've never anticipated before. The airlines, it's going to take them years to get back to the volumes they had before. And when they were justifying their business, it's on the basis of a 70% load factor. They don't have 70% load factors now. The cruise ships
Mhm.
haven't sailed since March, so they have
Mhm.
got no revenue. So a lot of businesses are suffering and they don't have a business model that will adapt to this environment.
Yeah, yeah.
But we can't fill a cruise ship with 5,000 passengers anymore. Not when we have to have social distancing with masks and 6 feet
Right.
apart, and people can't go dancing and they can't go to the bars and hang out. So it's not going to be the same kind of experience anymore.
Right, right.
And companies have to realize that this shift is permanent, that this is not just going to be, hey, the vaccine's going to come, everyone's going to get the vaccine, we can go back to business as normal. Not anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Talking about PPE, it just reminds me of Taiwan. They had a very prescriptive response, and with their experience with SARS, they had done this thing where immediately when they knew that this was going to be potentially really big, they shifted a lot of manufacturing that didn't previously manufacture masks and just turned them on. And so from, the beginning, they were only manufacturing what, their regular demand was, to immediately they would pump out millions, and they started to ration masks as well. So like adults only got 10 or a week. And so when I compared that, because when there's a pandemic, it's not like you don't know what you might need. I feel like the need is pretty laid out. You're gonna need PPE. You're gonna need XYZ.
The World Health Organization gave us very clear guidelines of what we're supposed to do in the initial stages of a pandemic to control it. Test, track, and trace.
Hmm.
What did we do? Nothing. We didn't do
Nothing.
testing, we didn't do tracking, we didn't do tracing. But you look at the countries that did well. You look at Taiwan, which you mentioned, South Korea, Japan, New Zealand, these countries have done a phenomenal job of controlling the virus. But the problem in America is we don't have one central government that could make those kind of decisions because every decision is made at the state level.
Mm.
Taiwan, they made a decision. Well, most people in Taiwan were used to wearing masks anyway, and it wasn't a big political issue like it was in this country. It wasn't you're taking my liberties away, you're trying to actually keep people alive. But because of what we did in America, we have 348,000 people dead.
Yeah.
And 20 million have been infected with this,
Yeah.
and that could have been avoided.
Yeah. And we could have had our dance parties at some point.
I mean, it's like
Yeah,
New
a
Zealand
year later.
In New Zealand, they have got no coronavirus cases.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got it under control. Even China has got it under control.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about your wife is the founder of a charity called N68 Hours of Hunger. And I'm curious, like, how did the coronavirus pandemic, how did it affect
It was huge.
the organization?
Let me just tell you a little bit about N68 Hours.
Yeah.
It's a program designed to feed hungry school children on the weekend. We found out that there were children who were not getting enough food on the weekend. So that is actually 68 hours from the time they get their last lunch on Friday to the time they get their breakfast on Monday morning, 68 hours of food insecurity for school children. And the problem is that younger children need every calorie that they can get so that their brains can keep developing, that they can keep growing. So it's a very big problem. There are 13 million. This was before COVID. There were 13 million hungry children in America. I guarantee there's way more than that now because of the poverty that has been created and the unemployment that's been created by this COVID-19 situation. So here's the thing. She set up a program to give them backpacks of food delivered to the schools on Friday that they could take home with them. And then that way they'd have food for the weekend. We provide non-perishable food that they can take home and eat on the weekends. Easy breakfast, lunch, dinner for 2 days and the weekend. So that basically is what N68 Hours of Hunger does in 46 communities across this country. It's been working incredibly well. Our business model is very good. I mean, we have a distributed business model, basically supply chain management. We look at the demand. We know how many hungry kids. The schools tell us that. We provide bags of food for those hungry kids. And we're feeding 4,500. This was in March. On March 11th, the pandemic hit. The WHO declared a pandemic. And so what happens? The schools shut down. So there goes our distribution system. And then the grocery stores start rationing how much we can buy. So we have two problems, supply and demand. And that's enough to create havoc. So what we did very quickly, and this is what businesses need to do, they need to pivot. They need to adapt and adjust to the new world as it exists. So one of the things we did was we invented from scratch a registration system that parents could register their children online using technology so that we could then deliver food to their home instead of to the school. We also got a contract with US Foods who were suffering because the restaurants were also closing down. And so they normally supply the restaurants. And so they were looking for more customers. And it happened that we were in the business of looking for more supply. So that was a natural fit. So we switched suppliers very quickly from people like Hannaford's and Market Basket and Walmart and Lidl. We switched to US Foods because we could get the quantities that we needed with US Foods. So the business organization, a not-for-profit charity, had to pivot very quickly. And it did. And it's still now feeding over 4,000 children every week. But now it's not 68 hours of hunger, it's 168 because the children are homeschooled, they're not going to school, they don't get the school lunches. Some districts they do, but not every district. We even had some districts where the school bus drivers were driving away from the school with our bags of food to take to children's homes.
Wow.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that's an example of how businesses have to adjust.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's amazing. And so will that stay the same, do you think, or will you
So
revert back to the original model?
every school district is different in terms of what they're deciding to do. And this is another thing about our country, that we have very localized laws about
Hmm.
education. So every school district can decide to do whatever they like. So some schools have gone to a remote learning, and some schools have gone to a hybrid system, and some schools say, oh, we're going to carry on teaching. Um, and so we have to have three now, three distribution channels instead of one. Some to the schools for the ones that are running a conventional school system, but also to the homes and also to support the hybrid more.
Yeah, yeah. How does that affect you guys from a management side? Have you had to hire more people now?
We have no employees.
Wow.
We have zero employees. In fact, everybody who works for E68 is not paid. Nobody gets a penny. Okay, the charity is 100% supporting hungry kids, and
Wow.
everybody who helps us is a volunteer. And we have 1,500, at least 1,500 volunteers
Hmm.
that don't get a penny for what they do, but they like the work, so they do it for us. And so we don't have to have employees. So nobody lost their job and nobody got unemployment because we weren't employing anybody anyway.
That's perfect. Has your food changed at all? The meals that you've made?
No, not really, because we have to provide non-perishable food because we're not sure whether these children have any kind of cooking facilities. Some of them were living in cars,
Mm.
and or couch, what they call couch hopping, going from one set of relatives to another set of relatives, depending on the day of the week. So the reality is, we don't know what kind of cooking facilities they have. So we can't give them stuff that has to be refrigerated. We can't give them perishable food. We can't give them things that require a lot of preparation. We can't even assume they have a microwave. So the food that we give them has to be easily transported. The other thing, they have weight considerations. If this is a 5-year-old child trying to carry a backpack of food, you can't put all the cans of soup and peanut butter and stuff. So you've got to be cautious about what you actually put in the bag.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, I like totally lost my question.
No problem.
I was
Yeah.
like thinking of it.
Well, it's amazing you have that many volunteers because I knew something about this, obviously, but 1,500 people, that's, can people donate to this too, or
Oh,
can,
yeah, yes.
yeah.
This is a 501c3 not-for-profit charitable organization. You
Mhm.
can go to the website N68 Hours. Just put in Google N68 Hours of Hunger. It'll bring us to our website. And yes, we have been very, very fortunate because in the pandemic, we have still managed to get a lot of financial donations. So we're not hurting from a financial point of view. We're only hurting from a we wish we could feed more children point of view.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, I don't know if you have these stats, but from a nonprofit side, I haven't heard that much about this in the news, mostly just businesses. But how many nonprofits have gone away due to, inability, due to some supply chain reason from the pandemic? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I don't have the information on that. I'm sorry. I do know that there is other organizations that are trying to feed hungry children, like Feed America and No Kid Hungry, and they've been impacted by this because of and they do have staff, and they may have had to lay people off. I don't know, but the need is higher now than it's ever been before, and so we shouldn't be laying people off. We should be actually employing more people.
Curious about, you had mentioned that you had invented this registration system. Whereas before, how did you register the students?
Oh, the program before was anonymous, and we wanted it to be anonymous. We didn't want to know who the children were.
Mm,
So the guidance counselors at the school would just tell us we have 183 food insecure children, and then we would deliver 183 bags. So
okay.
it was a number system before, and we didn't want to have a registration system where we would have people's information in a computer system somewhere. We didn't want that. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we had no choice. We had to do something like that. And in some cases, we couldn't give them food. We actually had to set up a debit card system. So we're giving people debit cards so that they can buy their own food.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to do that either because of all the inherent risks with giving people debit cards. But what you do in a situation like this, you adapt. You
Yeah.
do whatever it's necessary to do that. So
Yeah.
no, there was no registration system before.
Yeah. That's really interesting because it brings to light the need for data, because that is collection of data. And one thing that I also wanted to highlight from those countries that you had mentioned have done really well in their response to the pandemic, I'm not sure about New Zealand. I only know about Taiwan. So, but they have a national healthcare, universal healthcare, which has everybody like registered to that healthcare system. And so it was very easy for them to then ration, masks and like other PPE, etc. Versus here we don't have that. And so I think that that's a really interesting corollary that in order to make this happen, you had to collect some amount of data.
You do. And I should tell you that my cousin works for the NHS in the UK, and he is in supply chain management. And he was working overtime, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week for about 3 months, calling everybody he knew, trying to get PPE from all over the world. And the reality is, he had to do that because that was necessary.
Hmm.
And the problem with not having a national healthcare service is we don't have a central repository of all that information. Let me ask a question. I mean, if you get vaccinated for COVID-19, how can you prove that? Where,
It's a
where
card.
they'll give you a piece of paper
Yep.
that says I've been registered, I've got this vaccine, but guess what? That's a piece of paper that could be easily photocopied. So next thing you know, everyone's got a copy. Oh yeah, I've got a vaccine. Look, here's mine. And the reality is there's no central depository of healthcare information in America because it depends on which healthcare system you're in. You know,
Hmm.
and there are HIPAA rules about how you can have this information not be transmitted to somebody else. So we don't coordinate, we don't share that information. So it's going to be very difficult to have a central repository of who's been vaccinated and who hasn't. You know,
Hmm.
I know other countries are developing apps on your phone so they can be digital, or you could put a chip in the passport that would say this person has, electronically in the chip embedded in the passport, you could have that kind of information. But no one is thinking about this yet.
Yeah. This was part one of our conversation with Keith Launchbury here on Scientifically Speaking. Check out next week's show to hear the second part. And you've been listening to Scientifically Speaking here on WMPG with myself, Bernie, and Keith. Stay tuned for Sports Jam with Colin and Connor. And from your favorite nerds, mask up, and we wish you healthy bodies and clean air.